was finishing the dishes when my phone rang, his name lighting up the screen like a warning. We hadn't spoken in months, and even then, only in clipped, polite exchanges. A part of me hesitated before answering. I knew he never called unless he needed something, or had something to say that would cut deep. Somehow, this time it was both. He skipped the small talk. "Hey, just so you know, it's probably best if you don't come to Mom's party next weekend." My tongue felt thick in my mouth. "What? Why?" He sighed like I was the burden, like I'd just complicated his day by asking to exist. "It's gonna be a pretty fancy gathering. People from her work, the neighborhood, a few donors. She doesn't want drama. She thinks, well, we both think, you could ruin the vibe. Ruin the vibe. As if my presence were a stain. I'm her daughter," I said, barely holding my voice steady. "Yeah, but..." He trailed off, then gave that condescending half-laugh he always saved for me. "Come on, you know how it is. You've kind of fallen off. The job stuff, the apartment, everything. She just doesn't want people asking awkward questions." And there it was. Not even dressed up. I wasn't good enough to be around their curated lives. My hardships, my career pivots, the tiny place I'd hung on to like a lifeboat. None of it fit the image they were selling. "She said that?" I asked, already knowing the answer. He hesitated just a second too long. She didn't have to. I mean, it's obvious. There wasn't shouting. No dramatic hang-up. Just silence. The kind that stretches around your ribs and wraps tight until breathing feels like a bruise. I muttered some kind of okay, and the line went dead. I stood there, hand still gripping my phone, the sound of the dishwasher humming just beneath the pulse in my ears. My throat burned with everything I didn't say, that I'd spent months scraping my life back together from nothing, that I thought they might, just once, want me there for me, that I still remembered birthdays, even when they forgot mine. Instead, I sat alone that night, scrolling through the memories I wasn't invited to make. A rented garden venue. My brother posting champagne toasts with hashtags like "Nah, Mom deserves the best." All while the one person who actually called Mom during her cancer scare, the one who drove her to appointments when he was too busy, was told she wouldn't fit the narrative. I didn't cry that night. I did something worse. I accepted it. Only later did I realize that this was more than rejection. It was a quiet erasure, and if they wanted me invisible, I would give them exactly that, until the day they'd wish I showed up. People like to pretend families are fair by default, that love divides evenly, like slices of cake at a birthday party. But mine always felt like there was just one piece, and it was handed to my brother while I watched from the kitchen. Growing up, he was the star, the golden boy. Straight A's, varsity teams, science camp, gifted programs. He walked around with a spotlight that somehow dimmed everyone else in the room, especially me. I was the quiet one. The reader. The kind of kid who'd get lost in art projects and come to dinner still thinking about the story I was writing. While he won trophies, I'd get comments like, "Why don't you ask your brother for help?" Or, "You need to toughen up. Not everything's personal." And yet, everything I did was taken personally. If he failed, it was the system. If I cried, it was drama. I remember being 7 years old and overhearing Mom on the phone with Aunt Marcy, laughing softly. "You know, I think one of them got my brains and the other got my hormones." I didn't know exactly what that meant at the time, but I knew which one I was. My report cards were solid. Not perfect, but filled with real effort. Still, they'd always be compared, casually, offhandedly, to his line of straight A's, as if I handed them over to prove I wasn't him. Birthdays were quieter for me, dinners less enthusiastic. If he said something rude, it was "boys will be boys." If I frowned too long, it was "you've always been so emotional." Even small things held weight. In every family photo, I'd be the one standing just enough off to the side, not quite centered. One year, Mom forgot to pick me up after dance class because she was at his soccer banquet. When I called her crying, cold in the parking lot, she asked, "Can't you be more responsible? Why didn't you remind me?" I learned early not to expect being front and center. My brother's achievements were paraded at dinner parties while my milestones were passed over like side dishes. I won my high school art contest and Mom said, "That's cute," and then reminded me Dan was applying to pre-law. When he dropped out a year later, she blamed stress. If I skipped a college semester to deal with my mental health, she blamed me, and I don't say this for pity. I say it because I lived it. I swallowed it like gravel, year after year. I became careful with my presence, folding myself into the background, trying not to ask for too much, hoping maybe if I was easier, her love would find me by default. But it never did. I started building my own world. Quietly. In my journal, in notebooks, on long walks alone. There was a whole version of me that no one in my family ever met, because they never looked past the comparison. There's something deeply lonely about being invisible while standing right next to people who say they love you. So when my brother told me not to come to Mom's party, it wasn't just about one moment. It was about a lifetime of being told, not today, not important, not you. And somewhere deep inside me, something old and tired stood up and whispered, enough. I didn't storm out. There was no screaming at the dinner table, no dramatic suitcase at the door. I just left, like I always had, quietly, carefully, trying not to take up too much space. It started with the growing weight in my chest every time I came home. The barely hidden looks of pity, the tight smiles, the obligatory housework that clearly had no desire for an answer. I had been waiting my whole life for the house to feel like home. And one day it hit me. It never would. So I packed what I could fit in the back seat of my car, told them I was going away for a bit, and they didn't even ask where. Not once. That's when I knew it was the right choice. The first few months were hell. I couch surfed where I could, picked up part-time shifts at gas stations and diners, pulling double shifts so I wouldn't have to drive aimlessly at night. A few times, I slept in the back of my car, curled up with my hoodie as a pillow, pretending I was camping. It's funny how humility teaches you gratitude. I learned to appreciate a hot shower like a luxury spa. No one called. No one checked in. My silence must have fit so smoothly into their days that they didn't even notice I was gone. And maybe that's what I needed. I signed up for night school using what little I saved from tips. It felt impossible at first, juggling classes and work, eating cheap noodles 5 nights a week, worrying if my car would start in the winter. But something strange began to take root in me, pride. Not the kind you wear loudly, but the quiet kind. The kind that comes from knowing no one handed you anything. Each class I passed felt like a stitch, slowly sewing me back together. I started writing again, sketching ideas late at night, imagining a life where I wasn't the disappointment. I wasn't chasing anyone's approval out here, just trying to become someone I'd like if I met them. I told no one where I was. Not out of spite, out of survival. My past had a way of shrinking me, of making me doubt every choice. I needed distance. Still, birthdays would come and go, and I'd battle the urge to send a text. Even a hi. But I'd remember all the unreturned calls, the missed graduations, the sideways glances, and I'd keep my phone in my pocket. The real sting wasn't how quickly they let me go. It was how easy it was for them. But the freedom I had now, that was mine. I got to redefine what love looked like, what success meant. And even if no one else knew it, even if I lived in the shadows on ramen noodles and gas station coffee, I was becoming something. I didn't leave to teach them a lesson. I left so I could finally start learning mine. It's strange what starts to bloom when no one's watching you wilt. While my family stayed wrapped in their filtered lives, I was out in the world reassembling my own from scraps, piece by piece, line of code by line of code. It wasn't glamorous, not at first. I clawed my way into a junior tech support job at a small IT firm just outside the city. It paid barely above minimum wage, but it was a start. I watched, listened, asked questions no one else bothered to ask. I stayed late. I offered to clean the break room just to hear the senior devs talk shop. Within a year, I could troubleshoot in my sleep. I learned systems, taught myself front-end design on old second-hand equipment, and started freelancing after hours. People in online forums became my mentors. YouTube taught me more than school ever did, and for the first time in years, I started to feel capable. There's a special kind of power in being underestimated. When no one expects anything of you, failure doesn't scare you. It frees you. I took risks, applied for jobs several levels above my title, got rejected 50 times, heard nothing back 49. Then one day, someone said yes. At 26, I got a contract gig with a fast-growing software company. The CEO, a woman who'd built the company out of her garage, looked me in the eyes during the interview and said, "You've got grit. We like that here." I almost cried in the parking lot. That job changed everything. I learned how startups worked, how funding rounds happened, how user pain points turned into million-dollar ideas. I soaked it up, saved every penny I could, and surrounded myself with people who saw me. Actually saw me. My friends became family. Some were people I worked with, others I met at tech meetups or late-night study groups at 24-hour cafes. We were all hustling, broke, brilliant, and burning with something to prove. It wasn't picture perfect, but it was real. They celebrated my wins, no matter how small. When I had a rough week, someone always showed up with takeout, or a bottle of wine and a hug that didn't ask for anything back. 5 years flew by in this quiet, focused blur. I launched a small tech service platform, and then scaled it with the help of a few mentors-turned-investors. Nothing loud or headline-worthy at first, just steady growth, smart pivots, and a refusal to quit. Every time a contract came through, every time a pitch landed, I thought about the dinner tables I never got to sit at, the birthday I ruined by existing, the photo albums I was cropped out of. Not out of bitterness, just fuel. The funny thing, I didn't set out to prove anything. I wasn't trying to make them sorry. I just wanted to be proud of myself, to walk into a room and not shrink. And slowly, it happened. We went from shared offices to sleek co-working spaces to a proper headquarters. My name started getting passed around in industry circles. "She's the founder who bootstrapped everything." Tech magazines started taking interest. Our user base grew into the thousands, then tens of thousands, then bigger. But even as success began to whisper my name in rooms I'd only ever watched through glass, I stayed quiet. No calls home. No updates. No Christmas cards. Because I wasn't ready for them to take credit for a flower they forgot to water. I didn't need applause. I had peace. And for the first time in my life, I felt safe in the world I built with my own 2 hands. I wasn't looking for updates, but gossip has a way of finding you, especially when family is involved. It started with a random message from my cousin Lena. We hadn't spoken in years, but she DM'd me like we were just picking up where we left off. "Hey, just thought you'd find this funny. Dan's company closed again. 3rd one this year, but your mom says he's doing amazing things." I didn't respond at first, just stared at the screen like it was in another language. 3rd company? Last I heard, he was still parading around as a serial entrepreneur, dripping in expensive watches, and vague LinkedIn updates about being a visionary in e-commerce. As more cousins chimed in, usually around holidays or family weddings, I wasn't invited to. The picture started to form. Dan hadn't changed. He'd just gotten flashier. He had burned through at least 2 business loans, each time spinning the failure like it was someone else's fault. He blamed employees, blamed the market, blamed bad partners. Yet no matter how much smoke he left behind, someone was always there to sweep it away for him. Someone being Mom. She was still bankrolling him, apparently. Helping him furnish some penthouse rental downtown. A networking investment, they called it. Meanwhile, no one questioned how he was dressed in $2,000 suits, while his startup website still had typos and missing pages. At every turn, she protected the narrative. Dan, the prodigy who just needed one more break. I'll admit, the old ache returned. That bitter, familiar sting of knowing I was still the invisible one. I had launched a company, hired a team, earned industry awards, and I was still the emotional one who made things dramatic. He filed for bankruptcy in one state, rebranded in another. He bounced from co-working space to co-working space, still held dinners, still bragged about his latest strategic pivot. And somehow, people applauded it. Golden boys don't fall. They're caught. Even when Lena told me he crashed Mom's car after a party and tried to blame valet, she paid to have it quietly fixed. Of course she did. She always had painkillers ready for Dan's messes, but never bandages for the wounds he left behind. But here's the twisted part. Hearing all of this didn't make me feel better. Not really. I didn't want him to be a failure. I just wanted to ask, How many times do you get to be the golden child before people notice the shine is fake? Still, they painted him in gold, and I stayed silent in the background, stacking wins with no applause. They weren't watching, but soon they would. It happened by accident, one of those late nights where I couldn't sleep. So I found myself scrolling through social media, half hoping, half dreading I might see something. And there it was, a tagged post from a second cousin I barely remembered, standing beneath floating golden balloons that read 60 and fabulous Mom's birthday, the same one I was uninvited to. I tapped through the photos slowly, each one landing like a quiet bruise. A rented mansion I'd never been to, long tables draped in white linens, candles floating in giant glass bowls, my brother front and center in most of them, arms slung around Mom, smiling like nothing had ever gone wrong. Like I'd never existed. She looked happy, genuinely happy, and that surprised me. Somewhere in the feed, someone posted a video of the toast, Dan clinking his glass, making people laugh about how we always roll out the red carpet for Mom. Someone shouted, "Speech!" and she stood up, radiant in a silver dress. She thanked her loved ones who always show up, voice thick with champagne and sentiment. There was no mention of me. Of course not. I was the no-show, the sore spot. And yet, as I watched, I didn't feel what I thought I would. There was no tears, no knife to the gut, just a stillness, a kind of peace I hadn't known I was waiting for. Because the truth hit me plain. This wasn't my version of love. It never had been. All my life, I'd bent myself around their needs, hoping one day they'd see me, or at least ask to. But here it was. Their perfect stage lit up without me, and I wasn't angry. I was just done chasing a place I was never meant to sit. That night, I closed the app, plugged my phone in, made myself tea. The silence in my apartment didn't feel empty. It felt earned. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who would have cried for hours after seeing those photos, curled up on the floor wondering why love had conditions. But I wasn't her anymore. I didn't need their invitation now, and maybe I never did. I almost didn't go. The email sat in my inbox for 2 days before I opened it properly. At first, I thought it was one of those scammy press releases. "You've been selected!" But it wasn't. It was real. My co-founder had submitted our name months ago as a long shot. And now, there it was. I'd made Forbes 30 under 30. I stared at it longer than I should have, rereading my name like it might disappear. Part of me wanted to forward it to my mom with no message, let the link speak for itself. But then I remembered the birthday party, the toast, the speech. No, this moment belonged to me. The gala honoring the recipients was to be held at the Fairmont downtown. Full black tie, media, red carpet, everything. I RSVP'd without hesitation. This wasn't about attention. It was about presence. Proof. For years I had stayed quiet, until now. Days before the big night, our marketing manager posted that our company was co-sponsoring the event in partnership with several nonprofits. One name caught my eye, Grace Forward Foundation. I blinked. That was Mom's favorite charity. The one she fundraised for every year, hosted luncheons around, even tried to push me to donate to, back when you had a real job. I hadn't realized we'd chosen them. It was part of a rotating pool of causes we gave back to. I just signed the approvals, but now, it felt like the universe drawing a perfect, savage little circle. I didn't tell anyone, didn't plan anything, just got the perfect dress, sleek, black, simple, and booked a car. The night of the gala, my heart thudded against my ribs like it still didn't believe this was my life. I stepped out onto the carpet, lights snapping around me. My name echoed from announcers. Journalists asked about our company mission, our growth, what advice I'd give to young women in tech. I smiled. I answered thoughtfully. I stood tall. Inside, the ballroom sparkled like something out of a movie. Between champagne flutes and gold-accented name cards, I found my table. And just as I was settling in, I heard a voice just over the music. I think that's her. I turned. There she was. Mom. In a navy gown I'd seen in one of those birthday photos, standing next to none other than Dan, who looked like he definitely did not expect to see me here. Her face was a strange cocktail of confusion and something else. An emotion she hadn't worn with me in years. Awe. She didn't look mad. She didn't look happy either. She looked like someone watching a person they'd written off long ago walk directly into the room they believed she'd never belong in. Still, I smiled politely, gave a small nod, and turned back to my table. I didn't owe them anything. The keynote speaker started. Awards were announced. Speeches were given. When my name was called, I stood up to a respectful round of applause, walked to the stage, accepted the award with hands that didn't tremble nearly as much as I thought they would, and I spoke. Not about my family, not about being hidden or discarded, but about belief that growth doesn't always happen in sunlight, that sometimes the best things grow in shadow, forged in quiet spaces where no one is watching, and you learn how to build yourself. I said, "Here's to the girls too sensitive to be taken seriously." The women told they should be smaller. "You're not too much." They were just too little to understand your worth. I saw a few people wipe their eyes. I didn't look at my mom. Not because I was avoiding her, but because I didn't need her face for my victory to matter. Later that evening, we took photos in front of a branded step-and-repeat backdrop, right beneath our company logo, the one stamped next to Grace Forward Foundation. Someone said, "It's amazing what you've done." And for the first time in my life, I believed it. I knew he'd be there. I didn't plan around it, didn't try to avoid it. I just knew. Because people like Dan flock to places with flashing cameras and important people. He never could resist a well-lit room where he might be seen as important by association. What I didn't expect was to see him before he saw me. I was at the refreshment table, half listening to a conversation about blockchain and philanthropic integrations, when I saw him across the ballroom, perfectly tailored suit. A glass of champagne held the way he'd seen it done in old money movies. He looked just as polished as always, smug as ever, too. Only this time I wasn't looking from behind anyone's back. He turned mid-laugh, catching my eye. For a second, his smile froze mid-air, like static on a screen. He blinked, and then confusion. The kind that hits people when something doesn't fit the narrative they've rehearsed too many times to forget. He walked toward me slowly, eyebrows drawing together. His stare combed over me, the gown, the hair, the posture that didn't shrink anymore. "Wait." He squinted like my presence was a riddle. You're the sponsor?" For a full breath, I didn't reply. I wanted him to live in that moment just for a second longer. The dissonance, the realization, the pride unraveling behind his eyes. "Yes," I said calmly. "One of them." He opened his mouth, probably to make a joke, to spin it, but nothing came out. Just a weak chuckle and a slightly rattled, "Wow, I didn't know you were in tech?" That was rich coming from a man who once called my job glorified IT. "I guess there's a lot you don't know," I said, meeting his gaze. Something passed between us, that same electric tension from childhood days, where he mocked my clothes, my books, my dreams. But now I didn't shrink under it. He did. He stared past me, as if hoping someone more familiar would appear over my shoulder. Then suddenly his expression shifted. "Oh shit. Have you spoken to her yet?" There it was, not concern, not excitement, not even an apology, just panic. I imagined the thoughts racing through his head. What if she finds out? What if everyone connects the dots? What if I'm no longer the most impressive person in the room? "No," I replied simply, "but I'm sure she'll find me." Before he could muster some backhanded compliment or perform his usual brand of superficial charm, I excused myself. Walked away, smooth, like the moment owed me nothing more. Every step I took, I felt lighter. It was strange. I had imagined this moment 1,000 different ways. I thought I'd want him to grovel or congratulate me through gritted teeth. I thought I might feel the urge to humiliate him just a little, to throw success in his face with a smile. But in reality, it felt better to not need anything from him anymore. His approval, irrelevant. His confusion, delicious. I returned to my table, my people, my world. where no one questioned how I belonged there. They knew because I'd built it. With sleepless nights, failure after failure, grit no one ever saw. As I sat down, I looked across the ballroom one last time. He was still standing in the same spot, still staring, still trying to rewrite the story in his head, one where I wasn't supposed to win. I didn't notice her at first. I was deep in conversation with one of the keynote speakers, an older woman who'd built her first startup at 50 and told stories that made me laugh with my whole chest. Around us, the energy buzzed, journalists trading cards, industry leaders mingling, glasses clinking politely over polite ambition. But then the air shifted. You know that feeling when someone's watching you? Not just glancing, but really watching you. I felt it before I saw her. I turned, slowly, and there she was. Mom. She stood a few feet away from the table, hands clasped in front of her Prada clutch, the corners of her mouth frozen in what looked like conflict. There was confusion in her eyes, but not confusion like she didn't recognize me. Confusion like she couldn't understand why I looked like this. Confident, centered, important. I could almost see her rewinding, trying to place this version of me in the timeline she'd chosen to forget. Her eyes darted down to my name tag, the company logo beneath it, bolder than she expected. I gave her a small smile. Not cold, but intentional, measured. She walked toward me, and everything in her posture screamed performance, like she didn't want anyone to think I was someone her memory had misplaced. "Sweetheart," she said, reaching out as if we saw each other every day. "I had no idea you'd be here. This is incredible. I'm so proud of—" I held her gaze as her words spilled into the air like perfume. Expensive, but not quite genuine. My reply was gentle, calm. "Good evening, Mom." I didn't hug her. You could feel the pause in the room. The shift from admiration to curiosity. A few people seemed to subtly move out of earshot, sensing the tension dressed up as reunion. She blinked quickly, trying to warm her voice. "You look stunning, and I just heard you're a sponsor?" "Yes," I said with a nod. She opened her mouth again, probably to fake a compliment she thought I'd been starving for all these years. But I cut in, voice as smooth as lacquer. "Excuse me. I have someone I need to speak with." Her jaw didn't drop. That would have been too honest. Instead, she gave a soft, stunned "oh," and took a barely perceptible step back. I walked away without anger, without flair. Just peace, not punishment, not revenge, a boundary. It wasn't about making her feel small. It was about finally staying big. She didn't call after me. She didn't need to. I knew by the silence behind me that something had finally landed. She didn't lose me at that moment. She lost me years ago, when she sided with convenience over compassion, with appearances over empathy. This was just the first time she truly noticed the cost. And the cost was this. She no longer had access to the version of me I had become. They called my name, and I stood. Not too fast, not too slow, just calm, collected. The way I wish I'd felt at so many family dinners before. But tonight, the trembling girl who once shrank next to her brother at every holiday gathering wasn't here. I'd buried her in sleepless nights and quiet work, and now, in her place, stood someone who no longer asked for space. She simply took it. The ballroom light dimmed gently as I approached the podium. I could hear the delicate clatter of forks pausing, murmurs fading, champagne flutes set down in anticipation. I took a breath. My heart beat loud, but not scared, just alive. I looked out into the crowd and found faces I admired. Some I knew, some I'd only read about years earlier when they seemed impossibly far away. And then, toward the middle right of the room, were theirs, Dan and Mom. Seated at a table just close enough to hear every word, this wasn't revenge. This was arrival. I adjusted the mic. "Thank you," I began, voice steady, low, like truth spoken in a quiet room. I'm honored to be standing here tonight alongside such brilliant, resilient, visionary people. People who built not just businesses or tools, but better ways of seeing each other. A beat. My journey wasn't fast or glamorous. It was slow, incredibly quiet, the kind of quiet that sometimes feels like erasure, like you've been edited out of your own story before it even begins. Several people in the audience nodded, the flicker of recognition passing between us like a current. I spent a long time trying to prove I belonged in rooms like this, until I realized I didn't need to belong to someone else's idea of worthy. I needed to build the kind of space where quiet people could grow without asking permission. Somewhere near the back, I caught my team smiling, eyes glassy, proud. I often think about the ones who are overlooked, labeled as too sensitive, too emotional, not driven enough. It sticks to us like wet paint, doesn't it? Until we spend years scrubbing it off to find the gold they never bothered to see. The room was still, listening. I want to dedicate this moment not to the approved, celebrated, or predicted, but to the ones who sat at the edge of every room and wondered if they'd ever be seen. I let the silence land, just for a moment, because I've learned something. I glanced directly and unflinchingly toward the table where they sat, quiet. Doesn't mean absent. It doesn't mean weak. It doesn't mean you're behind. It just means you're preparing for something that's bigger than the people who couldn't see it. Dan's face was unreadable. Mom's lips were pressed into a line that tried to be a smile, but couldn't quite hold itself up. I softened, not out of pity, just truth. Please, believe in the quiet ones, because we often come back stronger. Applause began even before I stepped back, and it wasn't polite applause. It was real, warm, affirming, from people who recognized something in themselves through my story, even if they didn't know the version I'd lived personally. As I returned to my table, people stopped me, thanking me, hugging me, complimenting my poise. A few asked to connect. One woman, teary-eyed, held my hands and said, "I felt that in my bones." And 2 tables away, just within earshot, my family sat with nothing to say. They didn't interrupt. They didn't leave early. They just looked, not down on me but up, for the first time in their lives. That was the power of silence. Not the kind that erases you, the kind that echoes. It happened toward the latter half of the evening, long after the speeches had wrapped and the wine had started to dull sharper edges. Guests were laughing easier, lingering at tables, and the string quartets had given way to jazz humming low through the ballroom. I'd returned from a brief conversation with one of the non-profit directors when I saw them, Mom and Dan, locked in an exchange that was anything but festive. They were standing off to the side of the bar, near a golden-lit pillar, both of them just a little too stiff to be casual. At first I thought they were posing for a photo, but then I caught the tightness in my brother's jaw. Even from where I stood, I could see it. Something had cracked. Dan's eyes flicked toward me for a fraction of a second, just long enough to register the storm brewing in his gaze. Then right back to her. I don't know which part of the evening finally pushed him over the edge. Maybe it was my speech. Maybe it was the group of people who wanted to meet me afterward. Maybe it was that I never once acknowledged him directly. Whatever it was, he snapped. "I've carried your expectations my whole life." I heard him hiss, just loud enough to turn heads at nearby tables. And now she shows up out of nowhere, and suddenly you're all, "Look how amazing she is." Don't act like she didn't vanish for years. You were fine with that. Mom's mouth parted, her eyes darting side to side, as if trying to quiet him with glances. But Dan was past the point of subtle. "You let her walk around here like some kind of hero," he said, louder this time. "And now everyone's clapping for her like I never existed." People started whispering, watching. I stood still, unsure if I should intervene. And then realizing, no, this wasn't mine to fix. This mess, this tension, this unspoken competition between appearance and reality. It had lived between them long before tonight. I just happened to be the mirror that finally shattered it. "I failed twice, Mom," Dan growled. "2 businesses. You told me to keep going, to keep trying, that you believed in me. But the minute I didn't look shiny anymore, you just handed your love to someone else." That last sentence gutted me in a way I couldn't have predicted, because that's what it was really about. Not me, not the award, not my speech, but love, and who they thought was entitled to it. He wasn't jealous of my success. He was angry that I'd claimed back the affection he'd been hoarding for years as a safety net. Mom finally reached out, trying to calm him. Dan, please. We're in public. But that only poured gasoline over it. Exactly. Always about what we look like. Screw how we actually are. He shoved his glass down on the bar so hard it cracked. The bartender flinched. Then he turned on his heel and walked out of that ballroom, leaving a trail of stunned silence behind him. Mom just stood there, frozen, caught, unraveling faster than she could fake composure, and still. I hadn't said a word. All those years I thought I had to scream to be heard. Turns out, all I had to do was let them listen to each other. It came exactly 1 week later, at 6:47 a.m. on a Monday. I was sipping coffee by my window, wrapped in a robe that still smelled like the night of the gala, notes of jasmine, vanilla, and victory. The city was quiet, barely stretching its limbs, and my inbox was light. Until her name popped up like a ghost that still remembered your front door code. Subject. Just had to say this. I stared at it for a moment. My heart didn't pound. My stomach didn't lurch. I didn't brace for impact. That was new. The message was long, almost 2 pages without a break. It began with the classic openings. I've been meaning to write. I didn't get to say this that night. I was just so overwhelmed with everything. Word after word doing backflips to land on soft ground. She talked about how beautiful I looked. How eloquent the speech was. How everyone was buzzing about you afterward. How proud she was of me. There was even a paragraph where she tried to sprinkle in support retroactively. You always had something special. I just didn't know how to see it back then. Back then. Like I had quietly bloomed behind some curtain she wasn't privy to. And this was all just an unexpected flourish she now wished to claim a piece of. She didn't mention Dan. Not once. Not the outburst. Not the glass. Not the way the family image shattered and left her standing in it barefoot, exposed. Instead, she signed off with, I hope we can start fresh. I really want to be in your life again. Love always, Mom. I read it 3 times, not because I was moved, but because I needed to be sure I wasn't. And I wasn't. It didn't make me cry. It didn't make me angry. It didn't crack my pride or open an old bruise. It just felt like a door someone was knocking on after you'd already sold the house. There was a time I would have replied immediately, clinging to those 3 words. Proud of you. Begging them to be real. I would have archived it in my heart, read it like gospel when doubt crept in. But now, I no longer needed to be chosen by someone who only saw me after the applause. So I didn't respond. Not out of malice. Not to punish her, but because silence, this kind, the kind born from clarity, not pain, was peace. She didn't need to know the full truth. That I'd moved on. That I spent Sunday brunches surrounded by people who celebrated me unconditionally. That my team had become my family. That I laughed easier, forgave faster, and woke up most mornings feeling whole. She didn't need to know any of that, because the power wasn't in explaining who I'd become. The power was in knowing I didn't need her to see it for it to be real. The ocean doesn't ask for your attention. It just exists. Steady, vast, unapologetically beautiful. That's what I loved most about this new house. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a quiet little porch, and mornings that began with a view that didn't need validation. It just was. I sat there, hands wrapped around a warm mug, watching the tide roll in like it had all the time in the world. No emails, no missed calls, no performances to prepare for. Just coffee, sunlight, and silence, and me. There had been so much noise for so many years. Trying to explain myself, prove my worth, narrate my pain loud enough that maybe someone, anyone, would finally say, I hear you. But not anymore. Now I didn't raise my voice. I didn't reach back. I wasn't angry. I wasn't waiting. I was just free. I breathed deeper here. I laughed more easily. even small things. The way light danced across the countertop, how my books lined the shelves just the way I wanted, felt like a quiet kind of abundance. Like living had shifted from survival to sanctuary. Sometimes I'd think back and wonder, what exactly did they not want at that birthday party? My honesty? My progress? My inability to keep playing along, pretending I hadn't noticed the decades of tiny stings? Or maybe it wasn't personal at all. Maybe I simply didn't fit in the photo anymore. My presence would have interrupted the script. The story where he was the prodigy and I was the afterthought. But as I sat looking out at the ocean, I realized something deeply, undeniably true. I was never supposed to fit in that image. Because that image was too small. It wouldn't have held the version of me I've become. My growth needed more space, bigger skies, deeper conversations, people who knew how to hold grace in their hands and pass it back freely. I wasn't invited because I wasn't meant to belong to small minds, to shallow applause, or to tables where power was measured by performance, not presence. And that, oddly enough, brought me peace. Not loud. Not cinematic. Just soft. Slow. Like waves folding into shore. Every now and then, I still get messages from extended family. Birthday updates, wedding announcements, polite check-ins. I respond when I can. Gently. Kindly. Because peace doesn't mean erasing the past. It just means you no longer bleed from it. So I sipped my coffee, smiled into the quiet, and thought, maybe this is what winning really looks like. Not a stage, not applause, just a life I don't have to run from anymore. Sometimes we think we need to shout to be heard. We write long letters, draft emotional texts at 1 a.m., practice speeches we'll never give, just trying to pull understanding out of people who've already made up their minds. But I've learned something else. Sometimes silence is louder. Sometimes walking away echoes. They said I'd ruin Mom's birthday just by showing up. So I didn't show up. They wanted me gone, the invisible one, the complication, the contrast to their golden child narrative. So I gave them what they asked for. And with that space, I built a life they never imagined for me. While they polished their image, I sharpened my skills, and while they rehearsed the story where I faded away, I was quietly writing the next chapter, starring me. The uninvited, the unclaimed, the undeniable. Truth is, I don't hate them, I don't need revenge. I don't fantasize about them begging for forgiveness or showing up at my door with apologies too late. That kind of fantasy belongs to the broken parts of us. The version still hoping. I've made peace with the silence, mine and theirs, because in the quiet, I found clarity. They taught me what love shouldn't feel like, what family isn't supposed to require, what strength can look like when you stop asking for a seat at someone else's table and build your own instead. There's freedom in no longer needing to be chosen, and that's what real power is, not proving them wrong with fury, but proving yourself right with grace. Now, when I stand in rooms I once thought were closed to me, when my name is listed next to people I used to only read about, I don't feel imposter syndrome. I feel evidence. Evidence of who I became when no one was watching. Evidence of what grows when you're no longer busy begging. They shaped me, not with love, but with absence. They showed me doors by slamming them in my face, but I survived. And better than that, I thrived. They no longer say my name in family updates. Maybe it's easier that way, keeping me folded into the fine print. But I smile at that too, because a long time ago, I thought being left out was the worst thing that could happen. And now I know. Being left out made room for me to step all the way in, to myself. So no, I never yelled, I never begged, I never sent a speech I'd rehearsed so many times in my head. I just lived. Fully, quietly, on my terms. And in the end, that was louder than anything I ever could have said.